Welcome back to the Poor Proles Almanac. This is once again Andy, and we're happy to have Nate Kleinman join us again from the Experimental Farm Network. We chat about what they've been working on for the last few years since we spoke to them last, the future of the American chestnut, native crops, and crops that are going to be more important as climate change continues to alter what the landscapes around us look like here in eastern North America. Nate's work is truly an inspiration, and every time we chat, I can't wait to get back out in the garden. Check out their work at experimentalfarmnetwork.org and, of course, find them on social media to see what they're up to. Now, let's get into our conversation. And just one more word. If you enjoy the show, please give us a review on iTunes or give us a little 5-star on Spotify. That helps us rank higher, gets us recommended more, and it helps the podcast grow. Thanks again. Nate, thanks so much for joining us again. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm not too bad. Just getting over COVID right now, which is not super fun, but I am very excited to talk about the stuff you're doing and the stuff you've gotten your hands on. So for folks that haven't listened to our conversation 2 years ago and they're not familiar with the Experimental Farm Network, which they should be, can you give us a really quick rundown?
Sure. Experimental Farm Network is a nonprofit that I started with my friend Dusty Hins almost a decade ago now in 2013. We are focused on collaboration and sustainable ag research. We want to get people working together to work on developing things like new perennial staple crops for fighting climate change. We also have food justice, social justice focus. We do a lot of seed rematriation work, trying to return seeds to the communities where they came from and where they belong. We're doing a lot of climate adaptation work, and we fund our work by selling seeds. We didn't want to become reliant on the nonprofit industrial complex and, begging rich people for money. So we basically try and, make our money $4 at a time selling packets of seed.
Yeah, and that doesn't get tedious at all. I know from personal experience. That's awesome. I really like what you guys are doing. I've been following you for a long time, and that's why I'm always excited to talk about what you're doing. I buy some of my own seeds from you, including the very unique, pure American chestnuts that you guys had last year. I got, I think, a dozen from you. And I think I got about 90% survived both germination and the first year. I lost one, I think, during the summer, but I'm really excited to see what they do next year.
Oh, that's fantastic. Glad to hear it. Yeah, we're looking forward, hoping that they have a good crop out there this year so that we can have some more to offer next winter.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. It's really cool to see, not just see that you've been able to find them and get them to people, but that people are excited for them. I mean, I think you sold out in a couple hours last year.
We did. Yeah, that one sold out super fast. Every year there's something we can't always predict which one is going to sell out super fast, but that was the one that last year.
Yeah. You've got some really cool, interesting stuff that you've been working on that as this episode's come out has been released. So I'm sure you're excited to see how those do. When we had spoken 2 years ago, you'd been really excited about sorghum, and I know you've been still working on it and had some really cool trials. So could you talk a little bit about what you've been doing?
Yeah, I love sorghum. For folks who don't know it, sorghum's an African grain. A lot of people, their first exposure to it was The Walking Dead, where the survivors of the zombie apocalypse found some sorghum seed and were so excited because they knew that was something that they could grow and produce a bunch of grain. I think it's, other than corn, it's really the best grain to grow at a small scale for a homesteader scale. It's easy to process by hand. It's delicious. It's gluten-free. It's also much more drought hardy than corn. Most sorghum can survive on about 1/6 the water of corn. Doesn't need nearly as much nutrition in the soil either. And you can get multiple crops out of it. You can get a grain crop from the seeds. You can get a sugar crop from the cane juice. You can even get a vegetable crop by harvesting the seeds when they're still green. They're almost like a chewy sweet corn at that stage. It's just really lovely. The grain can pop like popcorn. One of the things that is most exciting about sorghum is that it has close relatives that are perennials. So we've been working with a population that was bred by Tim Peters out in Oregon many years ago. and that one is probably it's got a Johnson grass in its lineage, but it really is a sorghum at this point, and it doesn't spread at all like Johnson grass. It pretty much is a clump forming plant. It might make a small rhizome, and it can survive the winter in Oregon pretty reliably. The first time we grew it in New Jersey, we got the seeds from our friends at Adaptive Seeds. We had one plant survive one winter, and then we saved, of course, all the seeds from that plant and grew them out again. And we had four plants survive a winter in New Jersey. So those four plants, the original survivor plant, became the basis for a population that we call M61 survivor. And that is we sold those seeds last year. We're selling them again this year. And last year here in New Jersey, I grew that M61 alongside a few lines of perennial sorghum from the Land Institute. The Land Institute has been working on breeding perennial grains for decades now. Theirs were much more diverse. I was a bit surprised to see how much diversity was in the lines that I had. And they were, I think, agronomically, they were not as impressive to me as the M61, but I expect the perenniality is going to be stronger. So I'll find out in a few months when I see how what grows back, and whatever survives that winter is going to be the basis for our next perennial sorghum population, which hopefully will have seeds available next winter, and try and get a perennial staple grain that people can grow and use to replace all the bullshit GMO corn and soy that we grow on millions of acres.
Yeah, I mean, I know Kearns has gotten a lot of publicity, actually, not just some at this point, but it's still, totally inaccessible to people like us that are just doing whatever in our backyard. So something like that, I think, is really cool to see, and also has the numerous benefits that you've already outlined that I think grain might not necessarily hear. You're in New Jersey, so you're what, 6B, 7A, somewhere in that range?
Yeah, definitely. We're in 7A, even maybe 7B. It's This has been a very mild winter so far.
Yeah,
But yeah, New
I don't.
Jersey's South Jersey, where we kind of grow anything.
Yeah, so like I'm 6B, 7A because I'm coastal New England. So usually I share a lot with New Jersey, but I think because you're in the South, it's a little bit warmer. But yeah, that's awesome. I love screwing around with weird crops, especially cool perennials like that you can then say like, look at this cool thing I got out of it, through this weird lineage.
Mhm.
And that's just really fun, I think, to like take something that is so despised and then like spin it into something completely different.
I'm real interested in grains that can be grown on a home scale and on a homesteader scale. So one of the ones I've leaned into that's not a perennial grain, but is a really useful annual grain, in part because it's so drought hardy as well, is teff from Ethiopia. That's the staple grain in the Horn of Africa. It's what makes the famous injera bread that you get at every Ethiopian restaurant. And so we got a number of varieties out of the USDA gene banks to trial them in different places, and we have two landrace tefts from Ethiopia that we got enough produced for the catalog this year. Actually, both of them grown in New Jersey by different growers. One of them was at a collaboration we're doing with Princeton University, and the other was with a friend of ours who was the former executive director of NOFA New Jersey. Nagisa Manabe did a great job growing this teff from a place called Kobo Robit, Ethiopia. So it's the Kobo Robit landrace. You'll find it in the catalog.
That's awesome. Now, if you don't mind me asking, why are you focusing on stuff that's so drought hardy, given that I feel like our region is considered to actually gain more rain over the next 30, 40 years from climate change?
Yeah, we definitely, that's what they are forecasting for us. But I'm not sure how exactly that's going to go. And if last year was any indication, even though the mean rainfall number might be going up, we're still gonna have long extended droughts at times. And for our friends on the West Coast and in other parts of the country, these having access to these drought tolerant seeds is going to be increasingly important. these are ones that also it's interesting to see how they perform when we have those heavy rain episodes as well. And so getting these things out of the gene banks and into the soil so that they can adapt to the really, really outrageous weather that we're having and what's coming down the pike seems really, really valuable to me. And also, teff is something that I really love as a food. So it's something that I wanted to figure out how to grow. And there is an industry now growing it in places like Idaho and Montana. But developing and identifying varieties that can grow in our more damp environment in the Northeast is also valuable. I don't want to be wholly reliant on food grown in other regions, because you never know in the future if we're going to be able to have those ties to those regions that we have now.
Yeah. When this comes out, it'll be July of this year. But thinking about last summer, I think we went from April to almost July without really any rain. I'm sure you guys were basically in the same boat. And yeah, I think, like you said, it netted out being maybe a rainier year, but it didn't feel like it. And, if you're trying to get those spring starts going and there's no rain, that's a tall order.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really tough. And I grew one variety myself of the teff, and I was dry farming it, and the drought in the summer killed it. It was too much for it. But my friends who were growing it at Princeton, they had some irrigation going on that crop. So theirs was beautiful, and I actually am still processing some of those seeds, but by the time this airs, they should be in the catalog.
You'll be having a half waffle farm, half raised bed farm, depending on the time of year.
Exactly.
Welcome to climate change. So we were talking before we got on that you haven't announced it yet as of this recording, but it's going to be coming some really exciting stuff with corn. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm really, really excited about this stuff. You may have read over the last few years about mucilaginous corn. That is corn that drips this mucousy substance off of its roots, and it has aerial roots. You can see them above the ground at the first few nodes above the ground. That ends up with this sticky, clear juice coming off of them. And what scientists, Western white scientists, have only really recently realized is that, and it's something that indigenous farmers realized hundreds or probably thousands of years ago. Corn that produces that mucilage is actually farming its own nitrogen fixing bacteria. So the aerial roots are what we can see, but the roots underground are also exuding the same kind of mucilage, and it attracts nitrogen fixing bacteria. So it really is self-feeding corn. The corn is attracting bacteria that are going to help it produce that are going to produce nitrogen for it to absorb in its roots. And one scientific study found that one of these corns was able to fix 80% of the nitrogen that it needed. So this is corn that is essentially can be grown without any additional fertilizer. And some of the farmers in Oaxaca in Mexico who have a corn like this, when scientists were talking to them, they said, "Oh yeah, we take that mucilage and we put it on other crops too." So they're taking this liquid, and they're using it to attract nitrogen fixing bacteria to other crops as well, and apparently that works. So there's a really huge potential for this. And Michael Fortune is who we got our seeds from. He's been working for a decade or more in the Asheville area in North Carolina. So we have 4 populations of this corn. One of them is based on a speckled parching corn, like Pescaruntu is a Peruvian corn. The other is the purple morado that they make chicha with, the purple corn drink in Peru. Another is more like the Cusco gigante hominy, the really large, flat, white seed. And then the other one is what we're calling the ultra cross of that, which is a population that includes all of that and more. So Michael's been working with a whole bunch of different corns after first encountering some of this self-feeding corn in Peru. and he's already gotten quite a bit of attention for it, even though all the work is happening on his farm. So this is the first time that he's releasing seeds to the outside world, and we're real honored and excited that he's chosen to do that with us. Probably by the time this airs, all of the packets of these that we have are going to be sold out, but hopefully we'll have more and more available next year.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I have so many. I'm so curious to see how that plays out over the next couple decades in terms of our understanding of how that's happening, like how it's sharing that mucilage to is it actually like getting into the seed, so that way when you plant the seed it's with it again as it grows, and kind of what that relationship looks like, or what that material actually is.
Yeah.
People probably know a lot about it that I don't at this point, but it seems really, hopeful given how everything else feels.
Yeah, and I think we have so much more to learn about this corn, and the indigenous knowledge and practices that are attached to it it's really, really going to be important for us to learn from how it's been used in the past, and how it's currently being used. And it's also really important, and I want to mention that we're going to be attaching some kind of legal-ish agreement on it, like a materials transfer agreement, so that people who buy the corn will be agreeing to never patent it, never use this material to put intellectual property protections on it. This is going to be open source material that is freely available, and so we think it's really important to get this out there, and make sure that we put that on there, so that none of these corporations can come in and try and get a utility patent on it and say, oh, this is ours, when this is something that indigenous people have known about and have been growing for a long, long time. And if anybody is going to should benefit from it, it's those communities. So we're also going to be working, before we release it, we're going to be figuring out an appropriate organization that works in the Andes to do voluntary royalties with these seeds.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's really great. And I mean, I think even if a lot of people understand that the argument you're making, it's really hard to figure out how to put that on paper, and to, like, especially when we start talking at the scale that we're working at, where none of us have the resources or the knowledge of the legal system to, like, put together a comprehensive safeguard on that. And I think it's really awesome you guys are trying to stay ahead of that. I hope it works out, and I'm definitely going to be trying to grab some of those seeds.
We'll let you know. We'll make a post, and I'll tip you off to it, because we really do not have a ton of this stuff. We just want to get it out there and get people starting to work on it, because we often say that our model really relies on lots and lots of people working on this stuff. In plant breeding, so often you're looking for that needle in a haystack. So the more people we have looking, the more likely we are to find it.
Yeah, especially with corn, it's so photosensitive. It'll be really interesting to see how it does this far north.
Yeah, and because he's in Asheville, it's been adapted to a more northerly and cooler climate too. So it was a good place, I think, for adapting something from Peru to North America.
Yeah. Hey, we're taking a quick break in the episode to remind you that you can get a whole lot more information from poorproles.com. On our website, we have access to our supplemental reader for the podcast, which provides more depth and context, as well as thorough citations for all of the stuff we talk about in the show. You can also sign up for our newsletter, which updates you about limited releases, such as various nursery stock that we sometimes sell through the Poor Proles website, as well as updates about new merch that we have. You can also support the show through that website, poorproles.com, where you have access to our Patreon and our Substack to get early releases for articles and episodes. Now, if you enjoy the show and are just looking for even more audio content, go check out Tomorrow Today, which just wrapped up season 1, or tune into The Gastropocene, which is a project of myself and Dr. Aisha Khan to discuss the way our diets have driven the Anthropocene and what it looks like to use our diets for good. Now, back to the show. Now, on the totally opposite end of the spectrum, you guys are doing a little bit of everything, which is really cool. We've talked about like tree crops with the American chestnut, sorghum, esoteric grain, basically. a nitrogen fixing corn, or however you want to describe it. And then you've also got this interesting crop for oil, a perennial seed oil crop, the tea oil camellia. Now, whenever everyone talks about like tree crops and they're like, I don't know, what are we going to do with this? My response is always like, why aren't we using oil, making it into an oil? Like everything we could just press into oil and then the feed can be given to livestock. And that just seems like a really obvious thing to me. Like you've got these hickory nuts that produce really delicious hickories, but we can't process them. Press them. And I think this is probably a similar example of like, hey, we can just press it, get this really great oil, and then, do whatever with the byproduct. But where did this come from, first off?
So tea oil camellia, which is Camellia oleifera in Latin, oil bearing camellia, is a very close relative to Camellia sinensis, the plant that makes tea that we use the leaves to make tea. It comes from China, and it's the most. I've read that it's the most popular cooking oil in southern China, especially in Sichuan province. It's an incredibly high heat, has a high smoke point, so it's a great frying oil. It's considered to have a neutral flavor, but I find it has a really pleasant, unique flavor. It's really hard to put a finger on exactly what it tastes like. To me, there are some echoes of the flavor of tea in the oil, but it has a nuttiness as well, and it really is quite mild. I put it on salads. I've used it as a frying oil. I think that some people are familiar with the flavor because they've tasted it at Chinese restaurants, but it's something that we just most people don't have any knowledge of this plant growing. But North Carolina State has a whole webpage about how to grow it. The National Arboretum, the U.S. government has been growing it in Washington, D.C. for a long time. There are ornamental cultivars of this species as well, many of which also produce great oil and also happen to be beautiful and more cold hardy than a lot of the camellias. So it's a really exciting plant, and I'm hopeful that by getting this out there, we're going to get more people producing it locally, hopefully developing new varieties. And we just got this from one source, but I'm excited over the next few years to try and find additional sources for it, additional varieties. Apparently, there are some very cold hardy ones that come from the northern part of its range. So yeah, we're going to be working very hard to source more of that and make sure that it's something that we have every year. That was one of the ones that sold out really fast. We had about 5 pounds of seed and it was gone in a few days, and thankfully we were able to buy 5 more pounds from our source, but now they're out as well.
So
We'll
is
see.
that like a bush similar to like what a tea plant as we think of it? Camellia sinensis. I can never pronounce it right. Sinensis. Senin. Yeah,
And
I'm
then
not gonna try.
yeah,
You got it.
yeah, it is a bushy plant. It could become a small tree if you let it, but they're typically pruned to stay small so that they can be hand harvested.
That's awesome. How does it look in terms of like production value? For oil.
Yeah, I tried to do some calculations, and from what I can tell, it's probably about 1/6, maybe 1/8 the productivity of industrially produced soybeans as far as per acre. But that I'm not sure how accurate those numbers are. That was based on various sources online. So I think it's not going to be as productive pound for pound and as soybeans or something like that are, but with all of the ecosystem services that it provides, creating habitat, preserving the soil, sequestering carbon, it's going to more than make up for being less productive than soybeans. And because of the way it grows as well, being very slow growing, and being a shrubby plant, I think it's a great candidate for intercropping with other crops. It's not going to produce a ton of shade to shade out other things, so it's really could be a wonderful addition to an agroecological polyculture system.
Yeah. When I was younger, I'm talking like 15 years ago, I tried to grow tea here and it survived like 2 years, then we just got decimated in the winter. But I think the climate's probably changed enough that I could probably grow it now, just because, which is frightening. But like, I mean, just thinking about the last 3 winters, it's hard not to believe that's the case.
Yeah.
You know, we'll probably have a freak cold snap here and there, but that's about it.
Yeah, there are some tea plantations pretty far north already right now. And I believe there is somebody in Massachusetts who is growing tea right now. I know there's someone in upstate New York who's growing tea. There's a big planting in South Carolina. There are people here in New Jersey growing tea outdoors. So it's yeah, there's an industry coming for that. And we do have seeds this year for the first time for regular tea as well, that comes from India. I'm not sure how cold hardy those seeds are going to be, but we'll see. Most of the cold hardiest tea germplasm that's out there mostly comes from the former Soviet Union. There's a strain of tea from Sochi in Russia that is often cited as the most cold tolerant, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's even more cold tolerant tea out there.
Yeah, I mean, you got to hand it to the Soviets. Like, if they got one thing right, it was the agronomy they were doing was just surreal. That we're still feeling reverberations from it 50 years later, 60 years later, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I do appreciate it when I find things in the U.S. government database. When it says Vavilov Institute, I'm always I have a good bit respect for that place and for the scientists who starved to death rather than eat the seeds that were under their care during the siege
Yeah.
in World War II. And yeah, obviously the agricultural policies were fucked up in a lot of ways, and they weaponized food production to create famine in places like Ukraine. But the things that the scientists were doing were really next level, and we're definitely still benefiting from that in so many ways.
People want to paint everything as black and white, but man, you look at, like you said, the research they did is just next level. It really makes you wonder, though, like if we'd spent that kind of money in the U.S., what we could have done the last 50 years, like building on that kind of research, how much more adapted we could be today for climate change, that we're like,
Right.
we're totally inept right now. I mean, like people like us are trying to prep for it because the government isn't, and that's frightening. Like, no offense to
Yeah,
you, it's frightening.
I mean, that's what happens when our government's been bought and sold by corporations, and the corporations that are dealing with seeds are all chemical corporations that are trying to sell chemicals. And so it's been, we have government policy for so many years that has been focused on massive industrial production. And I will say, there are some really great people in the system who work for the government doing really, really important work preserving the seeds that have been collected over the last almost 150 years since the government started collecting seeds. And the work that they do maintaining and distributing those seeds is really quite heroic. But this is about funding priorities and what Congress chooses to fund and how the universities choose to spend their money. And there's only a few universities out there that are really focused hard on perennial agriculture, on developing perennial grains, on developing, working on breeding nut crops. I'm really impressed with the New Jersey hazelnut breeding program, and Washington State is working on perennial wheat, and there are some really important things out there happening, but they're so few and far between, and it really is incumbent on all of us out here, anyone who has a patch of dirt, to be using that to grow things. And that's a big part of what we try to do with EFN, is get those seeds into people's hands so that people can do their own breeding work. And you're going to get things from us that you plant 20 seeds and you're going to get 20 different plants, and that's the appeal. That's what breeds resilience.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned New Jersey. I'm going to be talking with Dr. Tom Molnar in a couple weeks from the Hazelnut program, if you know him.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's funny. It's one of those. It's an industry or a field that if you're into this kind of stuff, like it's a pretty small space once you get to know people. And
Yeah.
like you said, there are some really great people doing work in kind of rather innocuous places where you're thinking like some of the stuff that people are doing is pretty radical, and they're just like flying underneath the radar, just doing cool stuff, and no one really bothers them, and it's awesome.
Have you spoken to Chris Smith down in Asheville? He runs the Utopian Seed Project and used to work at So True Seeds. Chris is an awesome guy, and he's the source of a few seeds in our catalogs this year, including the Ultra Cross Okra, and Ultra Cross Collard. He's working on adapting things like taro to grow in North America, and identifying varieties, and trying to do crosses, and just really he's working on chayote for the north, and really really cool stuff. It's been really fun to work with him.
I haven't spoken to him, but I'm gonna have to look him up now.
Yeah, he wrote a book called The Whole Okra that was a really popular book a few years ago. He's a British guy. You don't expect a white British guy to be the expert on okra, but he's managed that.
Yeah, I used to live actually in near the tea plantation in South Carolina. When I was down there, I tried okra for the first time. Turns out it's the one food I'm allergic to. The only thing I've ever had an allergic reaction to in my life.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah. I was so disappointed. I'm like, I'm a southerner now. I'm going to eat this okra, and it was just bad time.
Dang, never even heard of that.
Yeah. Right? That was my thought. I was like, I'm not allergic to anything. This can't be an allergy. And they're like, your face is like swollen up. You're you need some medicine, buddy. I was like, all right, fine. If you say
Well,
so.
it will be interesting to see if you're brave enough to try, because there is one thing that Chris is also working on with okra, and we've discussed this a whole bunch, is okra as an oil seed crop,
Hmm.
because okra seeds are rich in oil that has a really nice flavor as well, and there's some people already touting it as the olive oil of the South, and it's got big potential. So Chris went in after watching me talk about how to use the government database and how to find the seeds. I pointed out that there's a that they've studied they've evaluated most of the okras in the government collection for the oilseed content. So he requested all the highest oil content okras, and is working on breeding a high producing oilseed okra.
That's awesome.
So I wonder if you're allergic to the green part or to the seeds, or both.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, there's only one way to find out, right?
Right. Just with having EpiPen standing by.
So, are you working? I know you. Well, I'm going to ask you a stupid question because I know the answer, but I figure I'll let you go into it more deeply. Are there any specific native crops that you're working with that you're excited about in the next couple of years?
Yeah, there's always native crops that I'm excited about. You already mentioned the American chestnut. I'm a big fan of the chinkapin chestnut, which is a lesser known species, also native to the southeast, and the seeds are naturally sweeter. They're smaller, but it's a really cool plant that historically was really really valued, and they would show up in markets a few weeks a year, and people would they the people who harvested them could charge a ton, and they would always get bought up. But chinkapins are one that I'm excited about. It is affected by the same chestnut blight, but it's not affected as much as the American chestnut. So the plants can produce seeds for many many years before the fungus causes the branches to die back to the ground. I'm always excited about maypop passion fruit. That's one of my favorite native plants. It's a delicious plant. Another multi-crop plant. Most people grow it for the beautiful flowers. They want to get the fruit, which has this delicious flavor that I think sweeter than the tropical passion fruit, not quite as sour or sharp in flavor. Sometimes it has butterscotch, caramel overtones. It's really, really, really lovely. Yeah, it's also a leaf crop. You can actually eat the leaves in a salad. You can use them as a vegetable. it's medicinal. It's an anti-anxiety crop. It's an anti-depression, and as a sleep aid as well. People get passion flower tea all the time. They're paying like $12 for a small box of 20 tea bags, when they could be growing this stuff at home and harvesting enough for 100 tea bags in like 20 minutes. It's really or less than. It's an incredibly prolific plant, and we're working on the seeds that we sell most years. Where we didn't have a good crop last year because of the drought, but we typically sell seeds from the northernmost wild populations that we know of in Delaware and New Jersey, and they fruit reliably. They're more cold hardy than a lot of the nursery stock that folks have gotten that typically comes from the South. Yeah, it's really a really, really cool crop. I'm excited about. I'm always excited about elderberries as well. We've got an elderberry breeding mix that we're offering, so that there's not a lot of elderberry diversity out there. There's only a few varieties typically sold, Adams and York, and some of those. And there's not a ton of work happening breeding new ones. So we've worked to source seeds from a bunch of different places and a bunch of different elderberry bushes that we know of, and including wild ones that are really productive. And we offer those so that people can work on breeding their own. Wild ramps, of course, is a favorite one always, and it's always one of our big sellers. I was going to say the Yaupon holly is another one. As a caffeine plant, it's a holly that grows in the southeast and is pretty much the only plant in North America that has significant amounts of caffeine, and it also has theobromine, which is the chemical in chocolate that makes it that one of the things in chocolate that makes people relax, feel great.
Are you doing anything with evening primrose?
We haven't done much work on evening primrose, but I am excited about it. We've done a little bit of work looking for some of the old varieties of evening primrose. Evening primrose, for folks who don't know, is a common weed with these yellow flowers, and you see it all over the place. The seeds are really nutritious, and evening primrose oil is an incredibly expensive commodity. But there used to be varieties that had really large roots, and the root were eaten as a vegetable. The entire plant is edible: roots, shoots, leaves, stems, seeds, flowers. The whole thing is edible. So it's this wild, weedy plant that's just sitting out there, and most people are not taking advantage of it. Whenever I see one and it's got the seed pods open, I always just shake some into my hand and pop them into my mouth, because it's an incredibly healthy thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, we just did a native seed mix that we're shipping out, and at the point of this, people listening, it'll have been out for a bit. But evening primrose is like a base one because it's so good at competing with invasives. If you're trying to fill in, a spot on the side of the road, or whatever it might be, and really claim that territory for some native plants. And it's a biennial, so that first year you don't get a ton of that growth, but it'll really crowd out a lot of the bad stuff. Let some goldenrod come in, all that good, native plants, give some diversity, support the pollinators, all that fun stuff. But yeah, those roots, you look at them and you're like, God, why are we not doing anything with this?
Yeah, it's something that we really should have a project to work on selecting those and trying to select for size. Probably 5 years of intensive breeding work with starting with a diverse population. You could probably get pretty far in breeding something new.
That's awesome.
They used to exist. The varieties used to be out there, but they seem to be all lost.
That's the killers when you start looking at some of these old catalogs and you start seeing these varieties that you're like, where did they go? Yeah, that kills me. You start because there's a lot of, especially the old like tree nurseries and stuff, and you start looking at the varieties that were out there, and you're especially like beach plums, stuff like that, and you're just like, they're all gone. Like 90% of them are gone. It's killer.
It really is sad. Yeah, I've been doing a little watercress deep dive recently too, and there used to be a lot more diversity out there of watercress, and that seems to be all gone. There were different colors, and we don't even talk about watercress as having varieties now. It's just like watercress. It's green. Enjoy.
Yeah.
One other, I wanted to mention one other wild native plant that I'm excited about is the devil's walking stick, Aralia spinosa. So this is a plant that it's in the same family as ginseng, but it's a relatively enormous in comparison. They can grow, 10 or 15 feet tall. You might see it in public parks and in the woods, and it has this gnarly looking, really thorny stalk. That's why they call it devil's walking stick. So, if you're ever sliding down a slope and you just grab for whatever tree is there, you are really unlucky if you find yourself holding up the devil's walking stick. But it's a really cool plant. It has these purple berries. It has a real tropical look with these big sprays of white flowers. It can be eaten as a vegetable. The shoots are the main part that's eaten. The shoots and the young leaves before it develops those spines. It has a close cousin in Asia that's eaten as a delicacy in Japan and Korea and China. There's some beautiful pictures out there of what the shoots look like there. And the native species is very, very similar. In fact, the Asian species has naturalized here and is crowding out the native one in some places. So we're excited about getting the native species into more people's hands to get it out there and compete with the naturalized one from Asia. But the most exciting thing about this plant is that it contains compounds that are antibiotic and that have demonstrated effectiveness against some antibiotic resistant infections. And these antibiotic resistant bacteria in wounds is a huge public health problem. And so any plant that is a potential new antibiotic is just incredibly important. So here's one that's beautiful. It's a vegetable and it's an antibiotic. So we just want to get more people growing that one.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you always hear about these people talking about like, oh, there's probably 20,000 plants in India that haven't been identified, and we need to go find them and catalog them and see what they can do. And it's like we could look in our backyard first. There's so much out there. We still
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
know just the very surface level understanding of so many of the plants around us. You still hear people talking about like cattails, like they've just discovered that they like are great for like cleaning water sources, and
Right.
that's a great resource we have that we're allowing Phragmites to just take over waterways, and then also saying like, look at how destroyed these waterways are when we have native plants that can do these great things, and we can integrate them back into these ecosystems, and in the case of cattails, we can also eat them too.
Yep. Yeah. So tasty, and even the pollen is useful and probably medicinal as well. Another one I'm excited to have seeds for this year that we've been really interested in for a while, but this is new. As much as I love saying we can grow anything in New Jersey, this one is not really happy here. Is the jojoba, which is native to the Southwest, to the Sonoran Desert, and is a really, really useful crop. Most people only think of jojoba oil as a product in cosmetics, but it has a long history of use by indigenous people as medicinal use and even culinary use. It's an oil that we can't digest. So, as an undigestible fat, it probably has some culinary uses that we've just really scratched the surface on. The government still lists it on the USDA website as a potential replacement for petroleum.
Jesus.
It's a plant that grows in the desert. It has, it can grow. It actually does better in drier years. It's a native plant. It provides habitat, and I mean, it's such a valuable, important crop. And in the 70s, there was talk about growing it on a massive scale as a biofuel, but suspiciously, that conversation all just sort of
Reagan.
yeah, it just stopped in the 80s. There was no money put towards it, and the USDA still has a collection left over from those days. And they've even, when we were getting cuttings from them a few years ago, we were focused on the ones that had frost tolerance. There's one that that have demonstrated it's an evergreen desert plant, and it typically grows in places that don't have prolonged freezes. But there's quite a few plants in the collection that have demonstrated the ability to withstand that. And most of the jojoba these days is grown in India and in Israel, Palestine, and these things are, it's mostly grown for the cosmetic industry. But if we had something like a national agriculture policy based on using agriculture to fight climate change, we would be pouring tons of money into jojoba. Instead, we just think about it as something to put in your shampoo.
Yeah, whenever anyone starts saying like, "Oh, we had this thing and it got defunded in the late '70s, early '80s," it kills me. Like I think about like I'm not sure if you're familiar with Garth Youngberg, who was at the USDA. He was a really big advocate for like sustainable agriculture. Jimmy Carter put him in the USDA because he was like this big like public speaker who people were like gravitating towards, and he was just like, here's some money, go do research. And like one of the first things Reagan did when he took over was basically stop funding anything for alternative agriculture and got rid of him from the USDA. And it was like, I'm just curious how many projects that we were like, oh, the USDA stopped funding this in '81, and it was like, well, I can tell you why that happens. It kills me every time.
I'm excited about the proliferation of civic science aimed at revolutionizing our agricultural system. And I mean, this is, there is no time like the present to be doing this work, and it's going to be too late if we don't do it now. We can't rely on the government. We can't rely on corporations. We've got to get together and work on this stuff ourselves. And so many of these projects are really, really long-term projects. It's, we're under no illusion that we're going to be able to develop a viable perennial grain crop, in the next few years. These are things that are going to take a long time. These are generational struggles. So we need to work on them that way, and we need to put systems in place that facilitate that kind of work happening. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do with EFN. Now that we've been around for 10 years and the seed sales have become a reliable source of income, we're really going to be spending the next 10 years, I hope, working to formalize that and solidify our organization as an institution that can play a role in the long term. And it's been really fun to watch the things that people are doing in their home gardens and on their small farms, and it's just it's already been successful beyond my wildest dreams, and I am thrilled to see what's going to happen.
I will say I've been aware of you guys for probably 5 years now, and watching how it's exploded it's been awesome to just from having gotten the opportunity to talk to you now a couple times, but also just like it's inspiring that it reminds me that we're not alone, that there's a lot of other people that have these same feelings, these same opinions, the same desire to actually go out and do the thing as opposed to just talking about it. We need that. We all need to know that we're not alone in that struggle. Inevitably, I think like when people listen to these conversations, like what we're having right now, they get excited, and then the next thing I know, I get emails that'll say, "Hey, how do I start a seed company? How do I start doing stuff like this? How do I contribute?" So obviously they can buy seeds from you, but do you have any advice for folks that are like, I love growing plants, I want to do this kind of stuff, like exactly what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, we need hundreds, thousands more seed companies. Ideally, there's a seed company in every county in the country because there's so much diversity to the weather, to the soil types, the culture. We need more and more. We've lost so many, and there's been an explosion over the last decade or two of new seed companies, but they're doing well. If you're a farmer, if you have some land and you're trying to diversify what you're doing, growing seeds is a great way to do it. And even if you're just a home gardener, we have plenty of home gardeners who are producing seeds for our catalog. Maybe they're only producing one or two crops and they're doing it in the backyard, but it doesn't take a bunch of space to produce a good seed crop. I have to mention that one of the things that I've been spending a lot of my time over the last 2 years doing is working with a new organization based in Maryland called the Ujamaa Cooperative Farming Alliance. And that is a Black, Indigenous, people of color led seed company. And it's a cooperative working on value added products as well, and increasing markets for the farmers who have been so systematically excluded from the agricultural system in so many egregious ways through the years, both official and unofficial, from USDA discrimination to neighbors burning crosses in people's lawns and chasing Black families out of the South. All of those injustices, it's going to be impossible to make up for that. But an organization like Ujamaa is really doing amazing work, getting new growers who have never thought that they could be seed farmers. It maybe never occurred to them. And so many farmers of color who are working, struggling to make ends meet, growing and selling seeds through the cooperative, through Ujamaa, through EFN, through other partner seed companies like Southern Exposure and others who work with us. It provides an amazing opportunity to supplement their income, and to be producing something that's culturally meaningful and delicious and important at the same time. So I definitely urge people to also check out ujamaseeds.com and ujamafarms.com to learn more about that. And folks can get in touch with us at efnseeds.com or experimentalfarmnetwork.org. We're always looking for new growers. If you've got something interesting out there that you think people are going to want, let us know about it. That's how a lot of our catalog was born. We get new people writing to us all the time with really interesting things. Actually, our most popular seed this year is from a random person we've never met who approached us over the winter and said, there's this amazing persimmon tree in Bloomington, Indiana. We call it the giving tree, and it produces 10 times the fruit each year than an average persimmon tree, and it has no astringency and great flavor. And the people who own it, they've set up this elaborate net system underneath it, and they catch you. They have a Google Doc, and they share all the 1,000 pounds of persimmons with all their neighbors every year, and it's this beautiful story. These beautiful,
that's awesome,
beautiful persimmons, and we can't keep them in stock. We're almost out of those. I'm sure they'll be long gone by the time this airs, but we're going to be in touch with Corey, who got us those seeds, and hopefully have way more next winter so that we can get everybody growing this seeds from this amazing tree and breeding new persimmon varieties from it.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, making food a little bit better, making everyone have a little bit more access.
Yep.
Nate, thanks so much. This has been so much fun.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.